I always like to feature a book that we have in our library, and you won't be surprised at all that I'm featuring Trap Lines. It was the second book of John's I read, and I don't want to take your time, but I want to read something if that's okay. I forgot to ask John. I meant to ask John, I forgot to.
No, not that one.
Don't read my work. But this is the last paragraph in his, well, it doesn't have a title, so I don't know if it's considered an introduction, but I just want to share this with you. I was just looking at it today and I thought, oh, I've just got to read this. All our stories rest on other older stories, and if we're careful, and if we're kind, and if we pay deep attention to memory and its tricks, we can bring forth our stories and keep those older stories intact. It's a way of saving our lives. Isn't that a beautiful I mean, I've just got chills. I literally have chills. But it's just so beautiful. Thank you for writing that, John. So thank you for joining me tonight. John Rember is going to be reading from his journals of the plague. John is a fourth-generation local, born in the Sun Valley Lodge when the hospital was on the third floor. He grew up and currently lives in the Sawtooth Valley with his wife, Julie. Educated at Harvard, he earned his MFA at the University of Montana. He then worked a variety of jobs and later on became a professor for many years at the College of Idaho in Caldwell and in the Pacific University MFA program in Oregon. He has written numerous articles, stories, and essays for publications, including Travel and Leisure, Wildlife Conservation, High Desert Journal, and the Huffington Post. His many books include a 1989 debut collection of short stories, Coyote in the Mountains, which I highly recommend as well. The memoir Trap Lines, Coming Home to Sawtooth Valley, was awarded the Idaho Book of the Year in 2004 by the Idaho Library Association. His book, MFA in a Box, a Why to Write book, was recognized by the Nautilus Awards, Hoffer Awards, and Midwest Book Awards as one of the best new books on creative writing. His most recent book, although I found out that he's written one since then, 100 Little Pieces on the End of the World, was published by the University of New Mexico Press in 2020. Recurring themes in his writing include the meaning of place, the impact of tourism on the West, and the weirdness of everyday life. So please join me in a warm welcome of John Rember. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. There are an awful lot of familiar faces here, and I'm very humbled by your presence. We had a little trouble getting here. Galena was closed by avalanches. They managed to get it open at 2 o'clock today, and we managed to get on the road. We were all set to cancel. What I'm going to read tonight is 3 excerpts from a much longer work that spanned 2 years. For 2 years, I wrote 2,000 words a week, sort of consciously trying to write primary source material. And the reason I did this is because I started thinking in the middle of the pandemic when my book tour for 100 Little Pieces was canceled due to the pandemic. I ended up writing a piece for the LA Review of Books called It's Not the End of the World. Well, it was the end of a certain world. And we can look back to 2019 and think maybe we can go back there, but we can't. I decided I'd start writing weekly meditations on what daily life was like during a pandemic. And At the end of one year, the pandemic was still going on, so I ended up writing another year, and it's still going on, so I may write another 110,000 words. So it's been kind of an adventure. I find that like Joan Didion, a lot of times I'll sit down and I won't know what I'm thinking until I write it, and then I've got a much better idea of what's on my mind, and so do other people, of course. But it's been kind of an adventure. I also wanted to kind of honor my grandmother a little bit with these meditations, because she was a very smart woman with a lot of opinions and a lot of really strange books that when she was babysitting me as a young child I got to look through, and she was fascinating, sort of damaged, angry, and really interested in life, but she died when I was 12, so I never got to ask her adult questions I really would like to have. But she was a smart woman, and when she was dying, I remember one of the things she told me was, I am so angry because I don't get to see what's going to happen. And that stuck with me. And then when I started writing these things, I started thinking, well, you know, I'm so angry because she didn't write down what did happen. And so much of that is lost. And the world through her eyes would have been a wonderful thing to see. And Tony reminded me the other day that in Traplines, I've got a scene where she, in the middle of the 50s, when they were testing nuclear bombs above ground in Nevada, she drove to the top of Timmerman Hill to watch the flash. And you know, and what kind of a woman does that, you know? But she got out there and watched it, knowing that she was watching something deeply important and deeply profound, and something we obviously haven't figured out yet. So anyway, that's kind of the background that got me started writing, and then it got to be a habit, and then you can decide, but then it got to be a bad habit. So I'll start with something that was posted on the 30th of March 2020, just as the first lockdowns were happening. And that was about the time the Mountain Express figured out that the Black Skiers super spreader event was worthy of the news, and the New Yorker decided that the Mountain Express's opinion was worthy of the news that time too. So anyway, it was an interesting time, and we didn't know exactly what to think about anything. So this is called Getting to a Tribe of One. In 1964, as a freshman in high school, I sat in the Liberty Theater in Haley, Idaho, to see Vincent Price in The Last Man on Earth, one of the first wave of germ theory Living Dead horror films. A plague turns the population into vampires, except for Price, who's immune because he was long ago bitten by a vampire bat. Price goes around pounding stakes into sleeping vampire hearts by day. By night, he hides from shuffling mobs of vampires in his mirror and garlic-festooned house. At the climax of the movie, Price is mortally wounded by the mob. Dying, he stands up and screams, "You have killed the last man on earth." The line, with all its drama, is met with indifference, which is about what you'd expect from an audience of the undead. What I remember most from the film is not the death of the last living human, but an earlier scene where Price, wandering the empty, daylit streets of Los Angeles, comes upon a Ford dealership. He goes in, sits in the new Thunderbird in the showroom, notices the keys in the ignition, and drives out through the floor-to-ceiling plate glass window onto the wide and empty boulevard. At the moment, a mix of 14-year-old insecurities, and my social life really could have used a Thunderbird, and a yearning for freedom without limits made me envy the last man on earth. Still, by the time I walked out of the theater that evening, I realized The Last Man on Earth was not about vampires or freedom or even Thunderbirds. It was a film about loneliness. Vincent Price is a lonely man, especially once the female lead turns out to be dead. The Liberty Theater in Haley, Idaho, is a much different place than it used to be. The actor Bruce Willis bought it and refurbished and repurposed it. A troupe of actors performs plays there now, or would if the whole town wasn't under coronavirus lockdown. Haley itself has been repurposed and refurbished as a retirement home. The lower middle class town of my adolescence has been gentrified, and houses in the old part of town go for $500,000 to $1 million. As a result, it's become a place full of rich, old, scared people. 2 COVID deaths have already occurred in the local hospital, and Blaine County, Haley is the county seat, has at this moment more cases per capita than any other place in the country. You remember when that happened. Enough staff at the local hospital have been infected that any new coronavirus cases are immediately sent to the cities of Boise or Twin Falls. Until enough people recover, the local hospital is mostly serving as a coronavirus clearinghouse. The Haley Airport is full of private jets of people with second and third and fourth homes in and around Sun Valley, 12 miles north. These people, sheltering in what they thought was a safer place than Seattle or Los Angeles or New York, have caused anger and resentment among the year-round locals. Empty shelves in the grocery store and the fear of imported disease have caused people who used to be welcomed here for their money to be told to leave. Go back to wherever your Learjet brought you, is the gist of the social media messages I'm reading. But ironies multiply when you start deciding who has a disease or the right to a roll of local toilet paper and who doesn't. Here in Sawtooth Valley, 60 miles north of Sun Valley, we have a population of Blaine County summer people who disappear when the harsh weather hits in November and usually reappear when the snow melts in April. This year, these people are back early, fleeing the microbes brought by skier-packed jets that landed at the Haley Airport twice a day from early December on. Some of them arriving in our valley as refugees have been told to go back to Blaine County where you came from. For 500,000 years or more, we lived in tribes, defined ourselves by our tribes, and submitted who we were to a tribal identity. People who thought of themselves as individuals were considered mentally ill. Also, people in other tribes were them, not us, and if they threatened our tribe, they were expendable. As many tribes found out, it's not good to be a tribe when a bigger, more powerful tribe is next door. The tribalism that has marked our politics since at least the Reagan administration has divided and redivided this country. Absent a strong impulse toward the universal, tribes have gotten smaller and more defensive. Race has been a reliable marker for division, as has nationality, also education levels, political parties. On college campuses, membership or not in fraternities and sororities. Blaine County people, year-round Sawtooth Valley residents. I'm especially sensitive to this latter distinction because for the first 50 years I lived in Sawtooth Valley, I spent most winters in Blaine County, where there was a winter economy and an accompanying job. In Sawtooth Valley, I was told to go back where I came from by people who had spent just one winter here, even after I'd spent a lifetime of summers here. But I've been full-time since 2004, and now I'm getting to the age where I'm one of the older full-timers. I have seniority enough to tell anyone to go anywhere, at least with Sawtooth Valley as a point of departure. But I'm hesitant to tell people to go back where they came from, even if they show up with a hunger for brains or Blaine County plates on their cars. I remember what happened to Vincent Price, who made me realize that real horror comes with the realization that you've become a tribe of one. Coronavirus is not just a physical contagion. It's taken the self-image created by 40 years of libertarian thought in this country, an image of extreme individualism, and has mutated it into a deep, solitary scream, where people you thought were in your tribe or even your family can be instantly and invisibly transmuted into the other. An infected spouse can place you in front of a mob of people trying to kill you. You, the last human on Earth. Of course, Julie and I and Juno the dog aren't going to succumb to that particular psychic infection. We're going to confront the coronavirus as a tribe, but we'll be a peaceful and unobtrusive tribe. We'll try not to treat the people coming into the valley with camping equipment or travel trailers as the enemy. We used to call them tourists, and we welcomed their dollars spent in local restaurants and motels and sporting goods stores. We still have a little trouble seeing them as enemies just because a virus is raging 60 miles south of us. Regardless of what happens, Julie and I will not leave each other. That's the promise I've made to Julie, and that's the promise she's made to me. As for Juno, she knows something is up. If we're reading on the couch, she walks up and rests her chin on one of our thighs. She waits until one of us rests a hand on her head. Then the three of us look at each other, and I like to think that we present a picture that stands in deep opposition to a lonely world. What I found in reading these early pieces was how much we've forgotten already about what it was like, and how much we were at sea, how much the world was full of rumors, and how unsure of anything people were, how much misinformation was going around, and the interesting thing about it is that I remember, listening to people on the news, medical personnel on the news, and they were so sure of themselves. And of course, what has happened is they weren't sure of themselves, but they were going with the best thing they could at the time. I think almost everybody was doing that until some pretty bad misinformation came out, and on all sides, and people started lying. And if I write a third installment of Journals of the Plague Year, I'm going to start by sort of meditations on what it means to lie and what it does to you, and what awful things it does to you. And I used to teach journalism in college, and I'd have these students come up with great ideas for stories that were really impossible to fact check, and I would tell them, you know, that's going to be a really hard article to write, because where are you going to get your other sources? How are you going to make sure you're absolutely right? And they would tell me how they were going to do it and how they were going to research it. And I would pick holes in their arguments, and I made money doing that. But you know, I had failures. They're all working for Fox News right now. This was after a summer in Sawtooth Valley of seeing more tourists than we've ever seen, and more people camping out in places where people had not normally camped out. I realized that life was beginning to change for us, and it was certainly changing in Sawtooth Valley, and I was terrified that the summer of 2020 up there was going to be the first of many summers a lot like it, because we had a lot of people who had read probably Boccaccio's Decameron, and they decided to decamp to a country estate rather than stay in the pest holes of the city. And so there they were, and there we were, and we were just praying that somebody didn't set things on fire. They did set things on fire, but this is called A Dark Wood, September 28th, 2020. It rained last night. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of water hitting our house's metal roof, pouring off the eaves and splashing onto the deck. It was a blissful awakening, even at that hour, because it meant the effective end of our 2020 fire season. We had made it through a risky summer of too many tourists and too many new campsites in dry grass and brush. An unattended campfire would no longer turn our green valley to ash, our lives into reconstruction projects. The fire 10 miles out Highway 21 from Stanley is in the mop-up stages. Human caused. It burned 2,300 acres and turned both sides of the highway into vistas of bare black lodgepole trunks. Julie and I drove out to see the damage, in part because we had cut firewood there earlier in the summer. We should have cut more. Everyone who was cutting firewood should have cut more, because all the dead and dry trees had burned up, and they had driven the fire faster and further than if they had earlier been carted off to a winter woodpile. The Forest Service is in the awkward position of having to treat dead trees as forest resources, when in fact they're sitting on thousands of acres of unexploded bombs. Decades of putting out fires have meant that the fuel that's built up when it does catch fire burns so hot it sterilizes the soil. A climate that's getting warmer, precipitation that comes all at once on the rare occasion when it does come, and policies that focusing on managing increasing numbers of tourists rather than resources all mean that the Sawtooth National Recreation Area is going to burn and keep burning as long as there are dense, deadwood-rich forests inside its perimeter. Once it does burn, it leaves viewsheds of rock and sand backgrounded by smoke-dimmed dry mountains. The scar of a decade-old human-caused fire across from where 4th of July Creek hits the Salmon River now exists as a barren heat island, 300 acres of black and white trunks occupying a bare landscape of decomposed granite, one where new trees do not grow and where the winter's snow leaves a month early. It's an ugly sight, barren, monochrome, and life poor compared to what it was before it burned. This morning's air is cold and clear. Clouds remain in the sky from last night's storm, and the fog bank that forms over Redfish Lake on fall mornings has kept us from seeing Mount Habard. To the south, we can see mountains with snow on them. Now and then, unfiltered sunlight hits us, and its warmth is unexpected and welcome. The morning's news is about the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and about Donald Trump's insistence that if he loses the election, it will be because of deep state fraud. The right-wing Proud Boys are demonstrating in Portland, along with left-wing counter-demonstrators. Brain-eating amoebas are in a Texas city's water supply. Also, Idaho's COVID-19 one-day cases have hit 601, close to the record. Also, Boise State's athletic department is focusing on the mental health issues of its athletes due to the uncertainty of sports during a pandemic. That uncertainty has increased this morning with the news that BSU might have a football season after all, subject to the players in its league staying healthy, a couple of state quarantines being lifted, and no super spreading events resulting from tailgate parties. Uncertainty in sports or anything else can't compete with the beauty of the world this morning and the joy that Julie and I find in being alive in it for one more day. If beauty in the world is one of those things that keeps us sane, it occurs to me that we shouldn't keep letting our forests burn. Last Sunday, we parked our car at the backcountry lot at Redfish, hoisted our packs on our back, and started walking up the Fishhook Creek Trail. The trail ends in a mess of deadfall at the wilderness boundary. The microclimate created by Thompson and Horseman Peaks has produced a rainforest along the creek, an oasis in the Idaho desert. We stepped over logs and waded through alders, avoiding the boggy spots where we could, all the way to where the canyon walls get vertical. In places, the deadfall was so thick we had to backtrack and try a different route. In other places, we climbed up steep hillsides only to find ourselves high above the game trail we were trying to follow. We ended up doing a couple of miles on steep and shifting talus slopes, side-hilling through dwarf aspen and avalanche debris. Fatigue became a factor. Knees and ankles became factors. We started thinking about things in our packs we probably could have left at home. It was a 6-hour slog to our destination, a lake with beaches of glacially polished rock in a high-hanging valley. We set up the tent in a place where the soil was deep enough to hold tent stakes, rolled out our pads and sleeping bags, and cooked a quick dinner. We were asleep by 9. 10 hours later, it was light again. Julie got up and made coffee, and I, awakened by the smell of it, put on enough warm clothes that I could leave the tent, stumble over to our kitchen site, and beg a cup from her. By the second cup, the sun was hitting our campsite, and the temperature was finally above freezing. Mist drifted across the lake. A meadow glowed red, green, and orange on the far shore. Above the meadow, a jumble of glinting talus and the high sunlit cliffs of the northern horizon. Above the cliffs, a cloudless, dark blue sky. Counting backtracks and circles, we covered the distance of a marathon on our trek, although it took us 3 days rather than 3 hours. Once we got beyond maintained trails, we saw no other people or evidence of people. In spite of this summer's huge increase of visitors to the valley, the high backcountry has stayed mostly intact. The mountain meadows still hold enough water to stay spring-like all summer long. Occasionally it will rain in the high peaks, even when it stays dry in Sawtooth Valley. It's a delicate biosphere up there, but it's a biosphere that still looks much as it did a century ago. That's not true of Sawtooth and Goat Lakes, or Alpine Lake above Redfish, or Hell Roaring Lake, or Cabin Creek Lakes. All these have become sacrifice areas, places so impacted by human presence that they've become artificial environments. At Saddleback Lakes, an easy day hike from the shuttle boat dock at the end of Redfish, the lack of an official trail has resulted in a kind of stock driveway, a beaten path 50 feet wide. The same thing has happened on the way to Goat Lake above Stanley. At some point, it becomes less damaging to the wild to construct a real trail, even if it means blasting one out of solid rock. We passed by Alpine Lake on our way down to Redfish Creek and the shuttle dock. It was going to be our lunch spot, but the lakeside forest floor was a barren stretch of lifeless dirt all the way to the edge of the lake. A few years ago, the Forest Service had attempted to get green things growing there again by fencing off overused campsites with crime scene tape. Now the tape was gone and the fires had been banned on the lake shore, but the crime scene remained. We reached the shuttle dock at 3 p.m. 17 people were waiting before us, and when the lodge shuttle arrived, we packed it to capacity. After 3 days on foot, it felt good to stand on a boat dock and watch the world go by, courtesy of an internal combustion engine. But it also felt a little like living in an oxymoron, being packed on a boat with other masked nature seekers headed for a car in a wilderness parking lot, in a once unspoiled valley now filled with giant houses, recreational vehicles, motels, and hotels, and a 300-person fire camp. Sawtooth Valley has become a great human swarm, mostly caused by people trying to escape the even greater human swarms of cities and suburbs. Coming back into a human swarm of any size was a shock. I walked the quarter mile to the wilderness parking lot. I got our car and drove it to the lodge parking lot and happily found a parking spot. Julie had ordered margaritas from the bar. We sat on the porch long enough to drink them, but it was hard to enjoy ourselves. Being out in the wild might have been good for our sanity, but when we looked at our fellow humans, it was hard to see them as benign creatures. They didn't look entirely stable to us, and they looked enough like us that the resemblance was disturbing. These were people who were deeply damaging the natural world that they depended on for food and oxygen and mental health. Julie and I, for all our low-impact camping, had our own internal combustion engine, pumping greenhouse gases into the biosphere. Besides, if you counted the environmental cost of our packs and stove and freeze-dried food and down-filled bags, Kindle and phone and emergency first aid supplies, our camping wasn't low impact. We were just as crazy as everyone else. At least we hadn't had kids. A few radical thinkers have suggested that civilization itself is a psychosis, and that if you're sane, you better not act that way, or you'll end up in a locked ward supervised by Nurse Ratched. Listening to the election news on NPR on our way home from Redfish didn't do much to contradict that suggestion. It takes effort, and at my age, pain, to get to a place where there's some kind of bedrock to reality, even if the human touch reduces it to bedrock. Anyone have anything they want to say or questions so far? I've got one more piece to read. Yes. Has it improved? Has the situation in Sawtooth Valley improved since the pandemic. That's it depends on the day, but I would say yes, it has. The summer of 2020 was really an anomaly, and there were so many people who had never camped before that were out there doing things that were threatening their fellow campers and their fellow campers' sanity, I guess would be the way to put that. And it brought, a lot of people were armed, and when I was a wilderness ranger in the Sawtooth for 7 years when I was much younger and capable of carrying much more weight. And people were always headed into the wild with guns, and that's, that didn't bother me any, but it did bother a whole lot of the campers who weren't used to it. So I used to ask them to, kind of put their guns away, and I'd say, by the way, there's nothing up there that's going to hurt you. And they would say, what about bears? And I'd say, well, the bears are not going to hurt you. They're deeply afraid of you. You'll see the rear end of a bear traveling really fast if you get that close. Unless they have cubs, and, but anyway, there I ended a piece on that was saying that there are things out there in the dark that only some people can see, and that's true. We all have our fears, and they will, I would imagine the fears that I would have in a dark alley in the wrong part of Chicago are akin to the fears that people from Chicago have when they go to Sawtooth Lake and camp there. So it's it's maybe a safer world than we think. I hope it's a safer world than we think, because we don't think it's a very safe world. And unfortunately, there are people like Vladimir Putin who are sort of confirming our fears rather than reassuring us that it's a benign place. Anyway, I picked relatively cheery things to read tonight. So I do have a website. It's at johnrember.com, and it's got all 104 pieces that I wrote over the last 2 years listed on it. You can go to the website and you can read them all, and that will really depress you. So this is a piece called Retirement Gifts, and I find, this may seem hard to believe, but I find getting older cheerful. It's things unfolding kind of the way they should, and there would be an awful lot of really, really unpleasant dead people still around if we didn't get older. So, I think we have to take that as a good thing. So this is called Retirement Gifts, and it was posted on October 25th, 2021. On the way from last Monday to this one, I passed my 71st birthday. I also spent time in the dermatologist's and dentist's office. My face is still healing from the little spritzes of liquid nitrogen, but my smile is less ragged than it had been after a September incident with an olive pit that had made it undocumented into an evening martini. When the dermatologist's assistant was updating my chart, she asked, "Are you currently in any pain?" "Existentially?" I asked. "Wrong office," she said. My dentist has put me on notice that he's retiring. His retirement project is to build a Japanese garden to honor the Japanese farmers who settled into southwest Idaho and eastern Oregon after the internment camps closed after World War II. They and their communities prospered due to their hard work and the farming skills they brought from the coastal properties they had been forced from by Roosevelt's internment order. A Japanese garden strikes me as a superior legacy for a dentist or anyone else. It represents a relationship with the land that is mostly absent in American industrial agriculture, which has become yet another extractive industry. American farms are mining topsoil, mining water, mining the capacity of rivers and lakes to remain potable, mining petroleum for diesel and natural gas for fertilizer, mining the health of the people who harvest their fields and the health of the people who eat the food that is harvested. Just as shoemakers' kids once went without shoes, potato farmers' kids don't eat French fries. The difference is that the shoemakers would have given their kids shoes if they could have afforded not to sell them, but the potato farmers won't let their kids eat potatoes because they've read the warning labels on the chemicals they spray on their potato fields. A Japanese garden treats the land as a person, one with whom you can have a dialogue. To paraphrase Martin Buber, you can have an I-thou relationship with the land rather than an I-it relationship. I'm happy my dentist is building a Japanese garden. I hope it tempts its visitors to start seeing the land as living and aware, and to start seeing human relationships with the land as living and aware too. Dentist chairs are the best places ever to experience existential pain. Plain old physical pain is not what dentists do best anymore. Now you're alone in that chair, your gums and teeth are numb, your mouth is propped open with a bite block, and any clenched fists or curled toes are just muscle memory from your first tear-scented mercury amalgam sessions as a kid. You're unable to move or talk, facing the slow tick, tick, tick of time alone with your thoughts. You used to have an I-thou relationship with your teeth, but they have all become treacherous its. Parts of you that have gone over to the material world, subject to decay and, if necessary, extraction. What do you think about besides the itness of your teeth? You think about being old and toothless, and you remember that Americans over 65 have on average 18.9 teeth left in their mouths. And 27.7% of Americans over 65 have no teeth left. That seems high, you think, but Google has a couple of pages on both on tooth loss and old age that confirm those numbers, at least to the extent that Google can confirm anything. You wonder about sharks who continually replace their teeth with new ones for as long as they live. You wonder at the box of stuffed animals, rubber balls, and balsa wood gliders that lies in the corner of your vision. You think they didn't give out balsa wood gliders when you were a kid. Even now, when you've aged out of eligibility, you want one. You mourn all the times you walked out of the dentist's office without a glider. You think that if you live long enough, you won't have any teeth. Then you think about the symptoms of long COVID, one of which is tooth loss. And then you think about the people who refuse vaccines, and you remember one COVID victim who said Jesus was his vaccine as they prepped him for a ventilator. You wonder if Jesus also serves as a dentist and if the COVID victim had any teeth when they disconnected the ventilator. You remember once a long time ago when a dental technician in the middle of cleaning your teeth asked you if you had accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and once she took her fingers out of your mouth, you told her you had deeply respected her religion, but no, Jesus was busy enough these days without having to take on a new portfolio. She didn't give you a balsa wood airplane. You wonder if the purpose of religion is to provide a balsa wood airplane as a reward for having behaved yourself, for sitting in the dentist's chair of life. It's a promise that you're not going to die there, that eventually your appointment will end, that the whole of existence isn't holding your mouth open while someone works on your teeth. You get to think about throwing the glider in a big loop-de-loop and having your spirit soar with it, even as your ass is stuck in the chair. You wonder if the cosmic dentist is Jesus or his evil half-brother, the Prince of Lies. Suffering is involved in either case. You wonder what the purpose of suffering is and if it's good for you. You think that suffering better be good for you since there's so much of it in this world. You remember reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and you wonder how he was able to show so clearly how consciousness can come from even the worst suffering, and how he came to value consciousness enough to make consciousness and not suffering the most important thing. You wonder if sharks think about the fact they'll never be toothless. You wonder if sharks are going extinct as the world's oceans turn to purple acid, and if they know it, and if that knowledge is causing them to suffer, and if that suffering is improving their consciousness or just forcing them into angry, bubbling denial. You wonder what else to think about while you're waiting for your teeth to be fixed. Somewhere toward the end of those thoughts, you realize you could just as easily start thinking about a good rare rib steak and having the teeth to chew it. You lose a bunch of points on the consciousness scale. Since before the pandemic began, my relationship with the medical profession has been difficult. Upon my ascension to Medicare 6 years ago, my primary physician announced that the only Medicare patients he took were patients he had already been seeing, and I qualified. But I thought it was a bad sign, and I began seeing small signs that our I-thou relationship was becoming an I-it relationship, the it being the Medicare patient that he used to treat as a functioning, thinking person. As someone who believes that all medical care in this country should be socialized, I began to see him as a certain kind of right-wing doctor, which meant he also stopped being a thou to me. About that time, I read Ezekiel Emanuel's essay in The Atlantic, Why I Hope to Die at 75, which is a well-reasoned and informed recommendation to consciously avoid the horrific treatment of the very old by the American medical system. They're shuttled from incurable disease to incurable disease. They're hit with dementias, grief after grief, a cascade of personality-altering drugs, and a system that rewards procedures rather than health. They enter a vast medical machine as raw materials and are refined over time into the functionally dead. In the meantime, their dignity has been destroyed, their consciousness obliterated. Death comes as a relief to everyone but the hospital billing department. Ezekiel Emanuel recommends stopping life-saving medical interventions once you're 75. In my case, that's 4 years from now, which seems rather too close as potentially fatal life decisions go. But the simple existential truth is we get old and we fall apart. At some point, the repair work interferes with making peace with your own mortality. You can decide quite sensibly to proceed on a disease-by-disease basis, but at some point, the system won't be your friend, and you'd better know where that point is. My dermatologist looks about 12. But he knows a bunch about skin cancer, and his youth makes me think he'll be there when I retire from medicine, rather than the other way around. As for my dentist, I'm sending him a book, Gardens of Japan, by Tetsuro Yoshida. It was a gift to me from a dean of the faculty at the College of Idaho. At the time, I was struggling with staying at the college, a paying job, or going back to Sawtooth Valley and becoming a writer, a non-paying job. The book is full of hard-to-read diagrams and puzzling building plans and mostly black and white photographs, but to the extent a Japanese garden is thought made flesh, the book showed me better ways of thinking about the world than the ways that I'd learned so far. I think my dean was trying to show me that I could relate differently and better to the college and become more forgiving of the incompetence, malice, and laziness that afflicted so many of my colleagues, administrators, and students. My dean knew something I didn't. If you can't forgive human imperfection, you end up angry and unforgiving toward yourself. The gift backfired, though. I saw in those dim photographs a way out of my life as an angry professor. I took it. In my new poverty-stricken profession, I could wander through a world where the paths were more journey than destination, and all the odd and fractured shapes of the world could be brought together in harmony, and there were no English department meetings. Not that it turned out perfectly, but it turned out well enough that I never wanted to go back, even though I missed teaching terribly. I don't think my dentist will miss dentistry. He's worked long hours for 3 or 4 decades, and his work has involved that old no-win proposition, fighting entropy. The book I'm sending him as a retirement gift is a doorway into a world where a gentle decay, coupled with the slow growth of moss and the lap-lap of barely rippled water, provide for moments of peaceful non-expectation. I hope his garden will add to that world. I hope it will be a place where entropy hasn't insisted on unconditional surrender, and as such, it will be a place where we old folks can hang out for a little while longer. Well, that's probably enough reading. I would be happy to entertain any questions about writing, about living in Sawtooth Valley, about being born in the Sun Valley Lodge, although my memory's a little hazy there. But I sit before you as someone who was born in Sun Valley 72 years ago. So I've seen a lot of changes in this valley, and some of them are positive. Anyway, yes, Tony. I guarantee that I do not plan my writing ever, which is probably one reason why I don't get hired by people who want to write their autobiographies. Yes.
Sorry, she wants me to
do I
repeat.
write these pieces in one go? On very fortunate days that happens. but usually I start on a Friday, get to the end by Sunday night, and Julie is my editor, and she goes over it and tells me everything that's wrong with it, and I try to fix those things because she's a very good editor, even though it makes me so angry. You know, but then it gets posted on Monday mornings. So yeah, it's about 3 days of thinking and revising, and a lot of times I write in these little vignette, you know, jumbles, and then I rejumble them quite often because sometimes they work better in different order than I wrote them. So yeah, or yeah, Julie thinks they work better. Yeah, but you know, I think every writer dreams about that moment when a piece writes itself, and if that ever happens, it's happened to somebody else. Yes?
I'm wondering if I've been here since '66, saw all the changes, you know, adverse lately. But I'm wondering if there's any push to make the Sawtooth Valley a national park, which might solve something, but also lots of problems.
I didn't catch that last sentence you said.
It would solve some problems, but also cause some additional problems.
Has there been any push to make Sawtooth Valley into a national park, and what would the implications be? I would say the push to make Sawtooth Valley a national park started in the 1900s. It was listed as one of the first places that Idaho would have a national park, and periodically that comes up. Periodically it gets beaten back down, possibly because it's such a small area. I mean, that it would be a big area. The Sawtooth National Recreation Area is a big chunk of real estate, but the places that people can actually be, you know, it's about 160 acres, you know. So what you do is you recreate the summer of 2020 times 10 probably in terms of population of people coming in there, and then you have a different administration, and basically being a Park Service ranger is crowd control, and I mean, if you go to Yellowstone in high season, you'll watch people hurting people. And one time when I was working for Travel and Leisure, they sent me to Thailand, and we stopped in Seoul, South Korea, on our way to Bangkok. And it was early in the 80s. They just shot down, the Russians had just shot down a Korean airliner, and Seoul was under martial law, essentially. And I watched these guys, they were plainclothes policemen, and I watched them in the terminal, and these guys would take their arm and they'd go like that, and a whole room full of people would go like that, and they'd go like that, and then the other side of the room would go that way. And they, with hand signals, they had these people so well trained that you realized you were in a police state, for one thing, but you also realized that when people get that crowded in those situations, whatever they came to see is, they can't see. There's too many people in the way. So that would be my take on it. I don't think, well, I think that all the answers are probably in Yellowstone Park. And if we were to go to Yellowstone Park in high season, it would give us an idea of what to expect, because there are thousands and probably millions of people in the United States who want to go to every national park and are busy doing it. So I'm not for it, but thank God it's not up to me. Yeah. And well, I think I think that's exactly what would happen. Yeah, yeah. There was a hand up over here.
John, I just wanted to ask. You said that when the pandemic started, you sit down and you'd write 2,000 words a day. I'm just wondering, when you sit down, did you know what you were going to write, or did you sit down and it just flowed? It just came to you?
My computer is littered. I'm sorry. The question was, oh, okay, you did. All right. Okay. My computer is littered with false starts. So if something isn't working, I'll get an idea and see how far it goes, and usually by the end of the first paragraph, going, this is a really bad idea, you know. But usually the news of the previous week would supply lots of ideas, and the more it's possible. I used to teach freshman comp, so you'd come into one of my classes and I'd say, okay, you're going to write on such and such this week, and nobody had a choice. And my goal was to produce people who could write on anything, no matter what it was, once they were assigned. And I know you can do it, but at my age and without the spur of having to write something that somebody else wants me to write, I write pretty much what I damn well please, and sometimes I change my mind. So it goes all over the place. My mind goes all over the place. If I'm not having a good time, I try to write about things that let me have a good time. And also, you try to get your licks in. That this is an imperfect world as far as I'm concerned, and I think I should point out some of its imperfections. Well, there's no excuse for that, but it's the way it is.
I think we'll take one more question.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Have you ever interviewed anybody about COVID and their experience to use in your writing?
No, I have gotten a lot of feedback from people who say there's no such thing as COVID, and that if people would just take ivermectin, it would all go away. Um, and, you know, well, we're only a couple of years out from most of this stuff. So people aren't asking those questions nearly as much as they're asserting something that they believe deeply, and I'm not going to change it. I had one more hand up over here, and if I can, yes.
Could you please speak to your use of humor in presenting the hard things in life?
Well, I mean, Joy Thine interviewed me for the Mountain Express and very kindly, you know, printed almost everything I fed him, you know. So, but he titled it, you know, Rember laughs so he doesn't cry. My previous book, the one that my last book that was published is 100 Little Pieces on the End of the World, and Julie's got a bunch of copies over there. She'll sell you one if you want it. But it's got a sentence in it that says, "We've got until 2030, 10 years more or less. These days less." And I've come to that position with a lot of research. And, you know, I don't know if you were here last summer, but Elizabeth Colbert was at the Sun Valley Writers Conference, and she had a presentation at the amphitheater. We went to that, and she was optimistic, and then later on, I heard from people who had gone to a smaller meeting that she wasn't optimistic at all. You know, and I think that writers in particular get in this situation where you don't want to cause people to get depressed, but things don't look good, and that's the way I feel. And at the moment, it's pretty damned interesting watching what's happening with the weather and the economy and the Ukraine, although that's such a terrible tragedy. But I have these conversations with our financial advisor, you know, and I'm going, well, you know, I'm not sure that any of this matters, you know, because he does stuff like, you know, 20 years out, you're going to have, you know, a big pot of money, you know, and I go, no, I'm not, you know, and neither are you, you know, it's just, so, you know, you think about these things, it's, all I can say is it's a great time to be alive, but don't have kids, you know. So that's about it. I don't know. I don't want to go too far into this. That's for another reading, you know.
John, do you intend to publish the Pandemic Journal?
If I can find a publisher, will I publish these things? I hope so. I hope somebody wants to take a look at them. But publishing is in a terrible crisis right now, and people are awfully worried about taking a chance on anything, and this is chancy stuff. You know, so anyway, okay, we better drop.
So
Thanks.